Today we're going to talk about how North Korea manages to stay alive despite numerous human rights violations, countless bombings, and a nuclear program. The country itself is a relatively small one, counting around 25 million inhabitants, which is roughly half the population of its more prosperous brother, South Korea. It hasn't always been like this though. In the 1960s and 70s, North Korea was popping off with its centrally planned economy, which at the time seemed like a great option. The country was heavily focused on heavy industry and machinery, while not really caring as much about consumer goods. This was crucial for their development, as in the 1960s, North Korea reached record GNP growth rates. These actions took its toll years later, and in 1976, North Korea was already at the same level as South Korea. Since South Korea decided to finance digital sectors and modern technology, which has paid off tremendously, North Korea, on the other hand, was going down. The quality of life was still relatively fine, but it was quickly worsening. By the end of the 80s, the country couldn't keep up with their economic plans, so they decided to borrow a lot of money to keep the system going for as long as possible. This meant they couldn't afford Western technologies and industrial advancements, leaving them behind South Korea and others. Their leader at the time, Kim Jong-il, had to figure out a way to continue his regime. He has paid many visits to the Soviet Union and its states, strengthening the bond between the two and managing to get more money for North Korea. You would think that if Kim's regime was falling apart and his position in the world economy is diminishing faster and faster, that they would consider saving up as much as possible whilst keeping the quality of life somewhat stable, but that is not the case whatsoever with North Korea. Instead, they invested in huge projects like the Yuh Tower, the Nampo Dam, the Ryugyong Hotel, and many others. It probably felt more important to Kim to maintain the personality cult than to actually care for the people of his country, nothing that we wouldn't expect from him. This obviously backfired when the Eastern Bloc collapsed and North Korea became even more isolated than ever before. It was already on the list of terrorist countries due to bombings and assassinations over previous years, which made it increasingly difficult to deal with anyone, apart from China. By 1993, China was supplying North Korea with 77% of its fuel imports and 68% of its food imports. Their economy was going downhill, and with the floods in 1995, which annihilated their crops and infrastructure, it hit them hard. These floods and droughts apparently affected up to 30% of the country, which was unthinkable. According to the United Nations Department of Humanitarian Affairs, they haven't seen floods of this magnitude in 70 years. The toughest years of North Korea were about to begin. The famine was here. Well, sort of, because citizens weren't allowed to talk about it in such matter, and if they did, they would be persecuted and the authorities would go after them. Doesn't this remind you of anything? Anyway, the famine supposedly caused between 240,000 and 3.5 million deaths due to hunger-related illnesses and starvation. Energy imports were substantially lower, and the country couldn't manage to feed all of its citizens. It looked like their economic system wasn't the best after all. But admitting their mistakes and trying to make it better? No, that doesn't sound like something that a member of the Kim dynasty would say. Instead, they lowered the food portions of their people to a couple hundred grams per day. Additionally, food was distributed to people according to their political standing and their degree of loyalty to the state. The country was only feeding 6% of the population. This inevitably led to a humongous increase in black markets, and even if people were risking things like public execution, they couldn't care less, since if they didn't do anything about the abominable situation of theirs, they would surely die either way. Black markets are still present in North Korea today, and they are the main reason why people aren't dying as quickly as before. Usually, people sell homegrown foods, products, or even their own bodies as sex slaves. The government could easily do something about it, but it seems that they realized it would only cause problems, so they just let it slide. The black markets are still a huge thing in North Korea as of today, but I'm not going to be talking about that in this video. If you perhaps thought that healthcare in North Korea was adequate, you'd be terribly wrong. Due to economic shortages, there was barely any equipment, and crucial things like thermometers, scales, analgesics, and antibiotics were not available. This not only meant you wouldn't get food, but if you got ill, there would be little help available to you. People tried to use all sorts of things to replace the medical equipment, but that just wouldn't cut it. Same as in Africa, where they also use improper techniques and equipment, it is very dangerous to everyone involved. The situation was so bad that even USA, which put North Korea on their previously mentioned list of terrorist countries, offered humanitarian aid. It turned out to be their biggest foreign aid donor at that time, counting 600,000 tons of shipments. This has since decreased because North Korea managed to beat the famine and continue developing. However, malnutrition was still a major issue even after the famine. People that left North Korea in September 2010 reported that the country is starving once again. A former US President, Jimmy Carter, visited the country in 2011, saying that the North Korean government reduced their daily food intake from 1,400 to 700 calories. Around the year 2015, things started to look a little better. Chronic or recurrent malnutrition dropped significantly, and child mortality was also lower. That was until COVID came to existence. Before May of 2022, it didn't look like much. No cases of infection were confirmed by the government until then. Data from other countries showed otherwise, but they couldn't really prove it. Kim Jong-un, the present leader, was secretive about it until the last moment, when he couldn't keep hiding it and admitted to COVID outbreak in the country. Unsurprisingly, the number of cases was skyrocketing, and after only a week, hundreds of thousands of citizens were infected. This was thought to be impossible because COVID never spread that fast in any other country. Either the government was saying the truth and COVID actually spread to millions of people in tens of hours after the first case, or maybe it was the case that the pandemic has been there for months. Kim immediately reacted and declared a national emergency along with additional border restrictions and lockdowns. This has proven very costly for him, making the whole country starve once again. All of these factors point to an inevitable truth, that North Korea is going down further and further in all regards. Their economical standpoint, infrastructure, healthcare, natality, nutrition, energy sources, you name it. Someone would think that there is no way a country like this is able to function in the modern world, whilst simultaneously having a nuclear program to this very day, in which they invest a major part of their finances. The sole reason for that is just to stay alive a little bit longer, because apart from other things, Kim has rocket systems aimed directly on the South Korean capital, so if he decides, he could wipe out 10 million people with a click of a button. Okay, so North Korea doesn't have to worry about its existence in this regard, but how about financing other stuff? They cannot possibly spend so much money on the nukes, the military, and still have money for all those other things? This is where the government's shady businesses come into place. That is, however, a topic for the next video, where we're gonna take a look at how exactly does North Korea maintain their budget, and how is it that even when most citizens are starving, they still have money for everything they need. Thank you guys for watching the video. If you like this content, consider subscribing and hit the notification bell so that you're not gonna miss on any future video.